Wow, thank you, Doc. That's a hard act to follow, let me just say that. I think we should just actually call Doc back up and let him wing a commencement address for you. I think you would be trading up at this point. I also want to thank Dean Cox today, not just for inviting me here, but for her leadership of Mercer Law School and of our state. You know, she is one of those all too rare people who really combines true vision with a heartfelt commitment to public service, and all of us are the beneficiaries of that. So thank you, Dean Cox. But most of all, I want to thank all of you, the graduates of the Mercer Law School class of 2019, for inviting me to share in this day with you. It is a real privilege. And before I go on any longer, I want to say congratulations. You have worked incredibly hard to get here today, and I hope that you'll pause in all of this to just kind of revel for a minute in your accomplishments. And to all the parents of the graduates out here, you have to be incredibly proud of your sons and daughters here today and feel just sheer joy in their accomplishments. So congratulations to all of you as well. You know, it's as trite as it sounds, it feels like only yesterday that I was graduating from law school, which was really the beginning of a life-altering experience for me. I love being a lawyer. And at the risk of losing all credibility with you right out of the gate, I'm going to have to admit to you, I really liked law school too. I liked the academic rigor. I was nerdy enough to enjoy the research. I liked the sparring in class. But a big part of the reason why I liked law school was because of the relationships that I formed. You know, you get really close to people in the boot camp that is law school. But while I really liked law school, I hadn't really experienced yet what it is that makes me love being a lawyer. And that began the day that I started practicing law. Even though, as Doc mentioned, I'm a graduate of the University of Georgia School of Law, some of the earliest lessons that I learned about what it means to be a lawyer, I learned from two graduates of Mercer Law School, Doc Schneider and Judge Griffin Bell. Doc mentioned that when I first came to KNS, I found myself lucky enough to be assigned to several cases to work with Doc. And since he told a story on me, I can tell one as well. We were both a lot younger then, given that it was back in the late 80s. My hair was a lot bigger then. Actually, I think Doc's hair was a lot bigger then too. And the first case that was assigned to me with Doc came with a multi-page memo from him of like 25 or 30 issues that he wanted me to research. You know, to this day, I don't think I've completed researching all of those issues. You know, Doc had thought about our case from every conceivable angle. He had the rare ability to be able to see around corners and to project how things might play out. And he was going to ensure that whatever came our way, we were prepared for it. I saw the same thing in Doc in preparing witnesses. I remember one client who I can only really charitably describe as the worst witness I have ever seen in my life. And we had been over and over this with him. It's about 3 o'clock in the morning. And he's going to be testifying first thing the next day, and I was finally able to cajole Doc into letting him go home and get a little bit of sleep. But the lesson I learned from that is that even when Doc didn't have much to work with in that witness, through sheer force of will and determination, he was going to drag him over the finish line. Doc brought that same level of rigor and excellence to everything he did, every task, no matter how big or how small. Nothing was going to fall through the cracks with him. He was all in. And he expected everybody else to be all in too. I've never known a better lawyer than Doc Schneider. And part of this, yes, is born out of Doc's sheer brain power. He did graduate first in his class here at Mercer Law School. But, there are plenty of really smart, mediocre lawyers out there. Because the difference between being a good lawyer and being a great lawyer is the commitment to true excellence that you have every day in every task. That was a really powerful lesson for me to learn as a young lawyer. But working with that kind of intensity doesn't mean that you have to beat the fun out of everything. As Doc mentioned, I've never laughed more in my legal career than I did when I was working with Doc. It's not only essential that you trust and respect the people with whom you're working, but given that you spend the majority of your waking hours at work, it's really important that you like those folks too. Doc brings the same commitment to his relationships that he does to his work. And I was married a few years after joining King & Spalding, and despite the fact that Doc is juggling a million different legal balls, he somehow managed to write a wedding song for us, both the lyrics and the music. It's easy to let your legal career consume you, but while being a lawyer will be an important part of who you are, it's not all of who you are. You have to invest in your relationships that are important to you in the same way that you invest in your work. Doc taught me that starting 30 years ago, and he's still teaching that to me through our friendship here today. The second Mercer Law graduate who really shaped how I look at the law and the responsibility of being a lawyer was Griffin Bell, the former Attorney General and a partner at King & Spalding when I joined there as a young associate. I was a second-year associate at King & Spalding in Atlanta when Judge Bell assigned to me a pro bono case to represent a woman by the name of Lovie Morrison in Barrow County, Georgia. Miss Morrison's daughter had been a client of another lawyer at the firm at the Saturday Lawyer Program, a pro bono program put on by the Atlanta Bar, and she had kept his card. And when her mother needed help, she came back to King & Spalding. Well, Judge Bell had known my dad and my grandfather. They were both lawyers as well, as Doc mentioned, and he knew that they were from Barrow County. And so when Miss Morrison came, he gave me a call and brought me to his office, told me about Miss Morrison's plight, and said that we needed to help her. Miss Morrison's family was the first African-American landowner in Barrow County, Georgia. They had owned 93 acres of land. Going back to the 1930s, about 6.2 acres of which had been annexed by a real estate developer building a subdivision. The problem was that Miss Morrison, who was mistrustful of the white court system back in the 1930s, had not timely recorded her deed. Instead, this deed was written on a piece of cloth, and she carried it folded up, tucked down inside her dress every single day as she was working out in the fields. By the time she did record it, a conflicting survey for another adjoining property had already been filed and was on the books, and this is what the developer was using to lay claim to her property. In the 1930s, in rural Georgia, Miss Morrison had very good reason not to trust the court system. But in the 1980s, it was being given another opportunity to earn her trust. So we filed an action to return the property using a theory I had learned in first-year law school I had planned on forgetting: adverse possession. Miss Morrison's family had used that property by washing their clothes in the stream that went through it and cutting firewood there, going back to those years. And as luck would have it, there was actually a witness to this who was still alive, whose family was known as the Dixie Mafia at that time, and she was the matriarch of this family. And they knew about our client's use of the stream because they had used the stream in another place to make moonshine. So this is not your typical big firm case. We needed Ms. Chansey to testify at trial, but she didn't exactly have a warm feeling for the court system because the last time that she had been in a courtroom was when her husband had been sent to the state penitentiary for killing a man and dropping him down a well. So after many afternoons of iced tea on Ms. Chansey's porch, she finally agreed to testify. From the moment that Judge Bell told me that we needed to help Ms. Morrison, he made it clear that she was to get the very best representation that we could give her. You know, I had pretty much given up my work for paying clients at this point and had put hours over months into Ms. Morrison's case. And while I was totally committed to her, the fact of the matter was, not only had I never tried a case, I'd never even seen a trial before. So Judge Bell enlisted a senior partner in our firm with decades of trial experience, Charlie Curbo, who also just happened to be President Carter's closest advisor when he was president to guide me through the process. Ms. Morrison was our client, and Judge Bell was going to make sure that she received the same commitment from us that we would have given to the Coca-Cola Company. It never would have occurred to him to do anything else. When the case was tried, our client and her daughter were the only two African Americans in the courtroom. The Supreme Court's decision in Batson prohibiting the use of race in jury selection had not yet been applied to civil cases, and so the opposing lawyers struck all the African Americans from the jury. The defendant, his experts, and the lawyers on the other side were all pretty much personally known to many of the jurors. This was a small town then, and all logic would tell you that our client didn't stand a chance of prevailing on a claim of adverse possession in that setting. But a remarkable thing happened in that jury room. That group of 12 jurors who went to church with the defendant, who used the defendant's lawyer as their own, they did the right thing. I wish I could tell you today that their verdict was the result of something I had done, like an inspirational opening or a really blistering cross-examination. But the fact of the matter is that the verdict was in spite of my performance and not because of it. I wasn't so much of an instrument of justice there as I was a witness to it. Those 12 people were given an opportunity to do what was right, and they embraced it. And I think our client wasn't the only one who left the courtroom that day with a newfound confidence in our justice system. I think those jurors really left with a real sense of pride at having taken their responsibility to heart and having done what was right. Ms. Morrison's case didn't make any headlines. It wasn't about a lot of money, and we didn't establish any new legal principles. But this experience and Judge Bell's example to me demonstrated just how powerful unlocking justice can be. The second way that Judge Bell influenced my legal life was by encouraging me to go to the Department of Justice. Not long after I had concluded Ms. Morrison's trial, Judge Bell suggested that I apply for a position as an Assistant United States Attorney in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Atlanta. And he told me that he thought I should go there for a few years and get some trial experience and then come back to the firm. And that's what I thought I would do. When I told a friend of mine who had also served as a federal prosecutor that was my plan, he told me that I might just rethink that coming back to the firm in a couple of years thing once I got there. And he said, after you have that first experience of standing up in a courtroom and saying, ready for the people of the United States. Boy, was he right. When I joined DOJ, I experienced what it's like to be part of an organization whose sole mission is to seek justice. Our responsibility at the Justice Department wasn't to win cases, it wasn't just to get big settlements, and it sure wasn't just to put people in prison. Our responsibility was to seek justice. That's it. As a federal prosecutor, I was called upon to do what I believed was right and fair and just every day in every case. I had the opportunity to stand up for victims, to make communities safer, and most importantly, and this is absolutely the most important part, to try to do it in a way that engendered the trust of the people whom we served. It was the privilege of a lifetime. But seeking justice wasn't just an opportunity, it was also a responsibility. While our job at DOJ was to do the right thing, sometimes it's not so clear what the right thing is. And while equal justice is a foundational promise in our country, there is no denying that there are real and troubling inequities in our criminal justice system, including racial disparities and disparities based upon socioeconomic status and wealth. And as a country, we're really still too tethered to the erroneous notion that we can somehow jail our way into safer communities without also investing in the other two essential prongs of meaningful prevention and ensuring that when people come out of prison, that they have the tools they need to be able to be successful. Through my service as U.S. Attorney and especially as Deputy Attorney General, I was fortunate to have the opportunity to try to be able to have an impact on these issues, not just in a case-by-case basis, but in a systemic fashion. So while I went to the Justice Department thinking that I would stay there for a couple of years and then come back, I remained there for 27 years because I was so totally committed to the privilege of representing the people of the United States. I have Judge Bell to thank for that. And had he not encouraged me to keep an open mind and to maybe try something out that wasn't in my career plan, I never would have found my true professional calling. When I became Deputy Attorney General, the first thing I did when I got to DOJ was to track down Judge Bell's portrait. And when I found it, I had it moved to my conference room so that every day as I sat at that table, grappling with issues from pressing national security problems to prison reform, I did it under the watchful eye of Griffin Bell. And finally, Judge Bell's service as Attorney General served as a model for how critical it is that the Justice Department preserve the rule of law. He took the helm of DOJ as Attorney General in the wake of Watergate. And I know that for our graduates here today, Watergate seems like ancient history. But after the Saturday Night Massacre, when President Nixon had the Watergate special prosecutor fired, and Nixon's Attorney General, John Mitchell, had forgotten that he represented the people of the United States, and he went to prison for his role in the scandal, the country had lost its faith in the Department of Justice and the rule of law. And Attorney General Bell set out to restore it. This was no small task. But Attorney General Bell was determined to reestablish DOJ's independence to ensure that the power of the law in the Justice Department couldn't be used as a sword to go after political enemies or as a shield to protect friends. Attorney General Bell made clear that the law is an instrument of justice, not of power. And not long after he got to DOJ, he stood in the Great Hall there, a magnificent room with DOJ employees overflowing. And he told them that the Department of Justice, and these are his words, as the guardian and keeper of the law, must be recognized by the citizens as a neutral zone, where neither favor nor pressure nor politics is permitted to influence the administration of the law. And he didn't just give speeches about it, he actually did something about it. He put in strict restrictions on communication between the White House and the Justice Department on cases and investigations. In his words, to prevent any outside interference in reaching professional judgments on legal matters. Attorney General Bell didn't know when he sat where you are today, when he was graduating from Mercer Law School, that he would one day be called upon to defend the cornerstone of our democracy, the rule of law. But he rose to meet the challenge of his day. Now, while you may or may not serve as Attorney General one day, you too will face weighty decisions over the course of your career. And that compass that's inside all of us, that compass that guides us in times of challenge, is being built every day with every experience. So the time for introspection is really all along the way to develop a sense of who you are and what you stand for, because you never know when you may be called upon to answer that question. As I think about what's ahead for all of you, I have to tell you that I envy you. I envy that you're on the front end of this exciting adventure of being a lawyer. Whether it's resolving a civil dispute or ensuring that an individual criminally charged is afforded his or her rights, or doing what I did for many years, holding people accountable who violate the law, the people of this country are counting on all of you, the lawyers, to achieve justice. It's an incredibly rewarding profession, but a really challenging one, and it requires giving it everything you've got, like Doc Schneider does every single day. And to do your job, you're going to have to be able to make decisions. You're no good to a client if you just give them a range of options without also making a recommendation to them as to what they should do. You may be wrong, but your clients aren't going to just be paying you for your labor, they're paying you for your judgment. Exercise it. And when you're exercising that judgment, beware of always taking the safest course, because the safest course is not always the best course. While I'm not advocating for being reckless or irresponsible, to fully embrace both life and being a lawyer, you have to be willing to take a risk, to be uncomfortable, to be bold. Regardless of whether you're bold or cautious, you also have to be willing to own your decisions. There's nothing worse than that person who tries to wipe away his or her fingerprints from a decision after things hit the fan. Not only does that generally not work, but if your colleagues sense that you're going to cut and run after things go south, they're not going to trust you. And if they don't trust you, they're not going to include you in the big moments, the moments that you went to law school for. The fact of the matter is, you're going to make mistakes. We all do. I recall vividly a deposition in the case, actually, that Doc told you about a few minutes ago. This deposition was the first I had ever taken, and it was an outright disaster. The case was about the failure of a big crane in the Savannah port, and we had gone to Savannah there to depose the other side's expert, who was a Russian engineer. And I realize now in hindsight, this deposition couldn't have been very important if they allowed me to do it, but I didn't realize that at the time. So this expert, who is a Russian engineer, was chain smoking throughout the entire deposition. That's when people could actually smoke in depositions. And he had one of those long cigarette holders that he held from underneath as he smoked and sort of held it like Cruella de Vil. I was incredibly nervous, and throughout this deposition, he was literally, not just figuratively, blowing smoke in my face. I did an absolutely miserable job. I don't think I made a single point there. He totally owned me. On the flight back, the partner I was with, that same oppressive partner that Doc mentioned to you a minute ago, he thought this would be a good time to critique my performance. So we're sitting in the front of the plane, both on aisle seats across from each other, he one row ahead of me. And he turned around and for the entire flight back from Savannah to Atlanta, told me and everybody else on that plane in excruciating detail just what a terrible job I had done. I got home and recounted the events to my then boyfriend, now husband, and told him how just badly I had blown it, and then blurted out to him, but I thought I would be so good at this. You're gonna have some bad moments too. You're gonna be disappointed in your performance, and while I'm not suggesting that that's anything to aspire to, you have to give yourself the space to make some mistakes and to learn from that and not be limited by it. In the legal profession, there's something even more important than how smart you are or how hard you work, and that's your integrity. Being a lawyer is not just a job, it's a profession. It's a profession that's built upon truth and honor and fairness. Your reputation for integrity will take years to build. And it's developed not by how you describe yourself. I've never entirely trusted people who felt the need to tell me how honest they were. Rather, it will be defined by what you do, how you act, both when the whole world is watching and when no one will ever know. Once you develop that sense of yourself, that compass I mentioned a minute ago, you can weather most anything. Your feet will be firmly planted. At the end of the day, your life will not be measured by how much money you made or how many wins you amassed. The only thing that will matter is whether you made this world a little bit better. And as a lawyer, whether you made it a little bit more just. Regardless of whether you go into private practice or the corporate world, or you become a public defender or a prosecutor or a public policy advocate, you're now a lawyer. And that means that you not only have a unique opportunity and ability that non-lawyers don't have, but also the attendant responsibility to foster justice in this world, to reveal truth, to stand up for the voiceless, to hold our country to its promise of equal justice. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was right when he said that the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice, but it doesn't get there on its own. So grab hold of it and don't let go. The people of our country, and indeed the world, are counting on you. Thank you.